can please take your seats. And please join me in a very warm welcome to Homai Vyarawalla. Very warm welcome. My very first question was, I wanted to ask you how it all started. How did you come to photography, or how did photography come to you?
How did you start your photography? How did it all start? How did you start your photography?
I started with photography because I came in contact with a gentleman who from his very school days was fascinated by it. And he used to live in Vyarawalla, and that is why my name is Vyarawalla. He came to Bombay to take his matriculation examination, and before that he was sending pictures to the press, doing work without electricity in dark rooms. And coming in contact with him, I was fascinated by the new product that has come up, which is the photography, and something different from whatever everybody else was doing. I started moving around with him, seeing how he was behaving, how he was taking pictures, processing them under a bed, four-post bed, because there was no dark room to do that work with. So all that thing, and besides that, it would fetch some money because it was very hard up for money. And I had taken a course in painting, which was the thing which never paid anything in those days. With all this consideration, I took up this profession.
And when you started to do your photography, did you have heroes or influences, photographers who inspired you?
When you started, did you have any heroes, any influences, people who inspired you?
There was nothing like inspiration or anything. It was just the want for earning some money, plus learning a new art. And in those days, I got 1 rupee for one picture published in the newspaper.
And at the beginning, you didn't sign your photograph. And I read that that the first pictures actually you took without anybody else's help was a full page in the Bombay Chronicle. Can you tell us about this first picture?
Initially, your name never went on the photograph. They went without your name, and then your first pictures were published in the Bombay Chronicle. Do you want to talk about those? Which ones were they?
Now, in those days, people thought women were not capable enough to take up the jobs that men folk were doing. And besides that, my husband, the man I was talking about became my husband afterwards, so I was calling my husband. My husband was already in contact with some of the press people, and his name always used to be there on the photographs that were published. So we continued with the thing as if I was not there at all in the picture. But later on, when more and more of my pictures started coming in the Illustrated Weekly of India, they started publishing my name on it.
And you then got more and more assignments, particularly the Illustrated Weekly of India started to publish your work when the war came. Can you tell us about that time and some maybe of the photographs you remember?
You later started to publish a lot in the Illustrated Weekly about the war effort when the war happened. Do you want to tell him a little bit about that time and some of the pictures that you took of that time? You might want to describe something that you took during that time of World War, around the World War. You can go ahead.
Around the World War, when the World War started, the editor had already come to know about my being a photographer. I was doing freelancing, and so we went on taking pictures all around Bombay and the surroundings. So knowing me full well, he called me up. He said, I want you to take pictures of the utility services. You know, during the war, there was a scare that Bombay would be bombed by the Japanese, as they had done in Singapore. and people had to be prepared to take up, to challenge it sort of, and behave in certain way to save their own lives and the lives of the people around them. So I was asked to take up all the utility services like the fire brigade, rescue workers, hospitals, medicine making, everything that was connected with looking after the welfare of the people during calamities. And although they had their own photographer, he trusted me more to take those pictures. So every week, some of the utility services pictures were published full pages in the Illustrated Weekly of India.
And you then started to actually document the freedom movement. You said in an interview that you were never part of the freedom movement, but you made many photographs. Can you tell us about that time?
Later, you started to take pictures of the movement, the nationalist movement in Delhi. And in some interview, you've said that you were not part of the nationalist movement, but you took a lot of pictures of that movement. You want to tell him a little bit about that?
It happened that Singapore was overrun by the Japanese, and the British Information Services of the Ministry of Information, they had the headquarters in Singapore for all the propaganda work that they were doing for all the whole world. Now they had to leave Singapore in a hurry, left everything behind, so they came over to Delhi. They wanted to start the whole show here again in Delhi, so they wanted to acquisition photographers. The counselor, who was supposed to be in charge of all that, he came into the Illustrated Weekly editor's office and said, I want 2 photographers. Now at that time I had taken pictures of the blind school, making a story out of it. And they were in my husband's pocket. The editor called my husband. I must tell you that my husband at that time was working in the Times of India. That is connected with the Illustrated Weekly. So he was called up by the editor and introduced to the man, saying, this is the photographer we would want to give you, sort of lend for 1 year's service from the Times of India. So that is how he was employed. After that they said, we want another photographer too. So his wife. So like that we came to Delhi. Now coming to Delhi, there was not much of a general photography I could do there at the time as a freelance. But then I was given accreditation from the Onlooker magazine in Bombay. They wanted me to represent them in Delhi. So I got my accreditation from the government of India. After that I started doing all the work in political circles. Because I was allowed to do it.
Can I just take the question? He also asked, he said that you said in an interview that you were not part of the freedom movement, but you took all these pictures. You want to answer a little bit about that?
Yeah. I did not belong to any party. In the beginning we were not even allowed to take part in the movement by our school principal. So I was completely out of political side of the show. But when I got the accreditation, I was allowed to go about anywhere, right from the president to the common man. And the Ministry of Information was recognized by the government. So I got the chance to take pictures of all the dignitaries at the different kind of work they were doing. Sometimes it was official work of meetings, sometimes it was big garden parties, and all of this were covered by me because of that.
Now one thing I was very curious, because Vivan told us a lot about archives, about the notion of archives, and I'm very interested in archives, and looking at your books yesterday, I realized the immense archive you have, because very often it's the only photograph of a certain moment is yours, and nothing seems to be lost. It all seems to be preserved. So how is your archive organized, and how come that it all was kept together?
Mrs. Vyarawalla, he says that your book is like an archive of a certain time. So how did you decide to, it's like it's an archive put together in that book. So how did you preserve all these pictures? Did you feel over the years that these would be important? I mean, what were your thoughts about preserving all this?
There was never a thought in my mind or my husband's mind that we would be preserving the pictures for the posterity. We were doing day-to-day work, just like daily wage earners, and putting away the negatives and the prints which were rejected on one side, so that they will be collected. I never cared to preserve any part of my photographic work, and it just for 23 years they were lying in boxes before they came out at the time of the 50th anniversary of the independence. A press photographer and a critic of photography, who was writing and all that, he happened to read my name in the list of long and distinguished service category in the PIB, Press Information Bureau. He was surprised to find one Mrs. So-and-so with all the men folks' names on top. And he started searching for me in Delhi, because nobody knew me, nobody thought about me. But it happened that I was that time with the camera repairer, and this man also happened to come there. It was a flick meeting, and from that time he saw my pictures. He said, "You've got a treasure house of history, so why don't you show people all this work?" I was very willing to do that. So the boxes were opened, the negatives were brought out, and he looked through he was the one who decided about choosing the pictures with my help, no doubt. And we held an exhibition. From that day on, I started becoming known.
And how many photographs are in your archive? Have they been counted? I was very curious how many.
How many photographs would you have? Have you ever counted them?
Well, never thought about it, but I'll tell you one thing. There was a chest of drawers, about 6 feet, and that broad. It was full of negatives.
Wow.
Because I was not only doing this political work, I was also doing freelance work. First time when I came to Delhi, I was the employee of the British High Commission. The High Commission had not started. It was started after the independence, but before it was called BIS, British Information Services. So I was working the whole time in the office for 11 years. And in the evening I used to do social work for the onlooker people in Bombay. So my whole daytime and my whole evening, right up to the middle of the night, went for taking pictures. And I never said no to any kind of pictures, like going to school functions, like somebody wanted a dog being photographed. So, there was no restriction between what photograph I would be taking. And that way, I went on collecting and collecting.
And actually, it's fascinating because if one reads your interviews and texts, even if you accepted to do all these commissions and never said no and did such an encyclopedic work, you do have moments which are most important to you. You talk here about the most thrilling moments, and among those are obviously many photographs of Nehru, and also your picture of Gandhi arriving for the Congress meeting to decide on partition. Can you tell us about your most important pictures? The pictures.
Can you tell him a
most
little
close
bit
to
now
you?
about some of your most important pictures, your most memorable ones? You've talked a lot about taking pictures of Nehru. You've talked about the picture of Gandhi when he came for the meeting for putting up their hands for partition. You want to talk a little bit about some of your most famous pictures and just the experience of photographing them. Maybe 2 pictures.
Most of the functions that took place before the transfer of power, naturally they were for the press and they were published. But beyond that, I found that the leaders at that time were very liberal minded, and they had no objection to my taking pictures at any time in any pose that they were having in. So what was it?
You want to talk about Nehru then?
Huh.
Yeah, you once said that he was so
Mr.
photogenic.
Mr. Nehru was so photogenic that everyone was trying to take his pictures. Besides that, he had a particular personality, more like an actor of a cinema film. He also was very fond of being photographed and publicized. So, but we had no difficulty in taking his pictures. There were some, finicky type of people who started, wondering why I was taking pictures. And some of them even mentioned at the time, why was I working for the Britishers? I should have been working for the Indian side of, these activities, their activities. So this kind of thing went on.
Now, among the many pictures, there are also obviously, and that's my only recurrent question, which I need to ask you, the photographs you didn't take, your unrealized photographs. Do you have regrets?
Do you have regrets about maybe a photograph that you didn't take? You just talked about the pictures you took. But do you have a regret around a photograph that you didn't take? What didn't you shoot?
Yes, a very big regret. That was the time of the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi usually used to have his prayer meetings late in the evenings. At that time I was taking, movies also, 16mm color movies. So there was no way of taking it because we had no connection, electrical connections or anything to help me with the light. But at the time, just before his prayer meeting, he decided, when he last came to Delhi, to have the prayer meeting at 5 o'clock in the evening. That was the best time for a movie, color movie. That was the best time also for the still pictures. I took permission from the British Information Services Director to go to the meeting and take the pictures, both still and movies. Halfway on the way to the place where his meeting was to be held, my husband had sent a peon to call me back to office, saying there is some work to be done and we will go tomorrow together so that one can take still, another can take, and we'll make a better coverage of it. So I naturally came back because my husband was my immediate boss. And I couldn't say no to him. I couldn't say, no, I'm going, you better come tomorrow again. So I went back. Within an hour's time, Mahatmaji was assassinated. And that was the biggest, calamities of it. After that, people had come to know that I had taken permission from the director of the British Information Service. The phone calls came to British High Commission. This, why don't you, not BIS, tell us the name of your photographer, that she was the only one there. Everybody thought I had taken the picture. I was not there at all.
And I have one last question, which is actually something I've been very fascinated by when I read in your biography and in your text. You woke up every morning at 4:30 a.m., which I think is very fascinating, this brutally early situation. And then, all of a sudden, after so many years of taking pictures every day, you stopped in 1970. And you said it was not worthwhile anymore. All the good things had gone. And you said there were all these security guards and the situation had changed. So I was very curious if you could talk about this moment when something changed in 1970. What prompted you to stop?
Mrs. Vyarawalla, you stopped photographing in 1970.
Yeah.
Why did you stop photographing in 1970? Why did you put your camera down?
I put my camera down because things had changed drastically, both in the official circle and in the attitude of the people around. Population had increased. All sorts and kinds of people started coming in. And sometimes when they couldn't find any other work to do, they would pick up the camera and start becoming, press photographers. They didn't know how to, behave in a cultured life. So, and besides that, their main function, main purpose for taking pictures was earning money by taking pictures of the common people with the dignitaries and all that. So with all that, that financial part came in. Then, because they were doing all that, they would get crash into parties. They would get into the hedges and get in, where eats and drinks were given. I'm regret to say that some of the photographers came there in order to eat and drink, uninvited.
I've got one very last question. Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this lovely little book, which is an advice to a young poet. And I was incredibly curious what today, in 2011, would be your advice to a young photographer.
Today, in 2011, what would be your advice to a young photographer?
Be honest. Don't manipulate pictures according to your own ideals and ideas. Represent only those things that happen and the way they happened, and not give a biased view of anything. That is one, and not be a nuisance to the people photographed, and not take pictures on a sly, and using those pictures without their permission. I'm talking about press photography, because I was not doing general photography so far.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.